Welcome to another episode of the Revenue Architects podcast. Today I have a special guest, Sally Ladrach. She is the Director of Sales Enablement and Training for SaveATree, which is a shrub and lawn care service, and she is also a board member of the Revenue Enablement Society. While her skill set is in sales enablement, her specialty is in data, and that's why I have her here today. Sally, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
So, Sally, give us a quick rundown on what led you to build a data-driven approach to revenue enablement.
What drives me, I think, is impact in general. And I've seen that in every position that I've had in my career. And I think the first place where I was able to really use that and start digging into data is when I was a sales engineer at USA Today. And so one of the things that I would do is I would essentially look at either a local business or an enterprise company and analyze their marketing, so their website, their social media presence, all this different stuff. And I would have to come up with a recommendation of what suite of digital marketing products we should recommend. And the basis of those proposals was I would have to look at those numbers and say, based upon what I know and what I see, this is the potential upside in real numbers if you were to use our products, which is what I think any good sales engineer probably does. But I think that was my first exposure to really walking backwards from a problem and putting real numbers to the impact whatever it was I was recommending would potentially have on that business. That was, I think, where it started. But then when I got into enablement, I started to really see the connection again with data to impact. Every single one of us is probably in some way, shape, or form trying to make the business money. And for me, in that role, the way that I was going to help do that was to make sure that our salespeople could sell more of the digital marketing products, because I moved from that sales engineering role into my first enablement role. Just like I had done with our customers, I said, okay, now my customer is the business, and I have to understand where the hangups are in the sales process. I already had a very good understanding of the consumer journey and how to quantify that for our businesses and where things got hung up there. So I applied that same methodology to what I was doing in enablement to understand where are the problems, why are they happening? Okay, now let's figure out a way to go enable people and solve that so that we can really prove out that impact. And that's really been every role that I've had in enablement since has been using data to identify and quantify problems, create solutions, and then be able to show the impact.
I love the connection. It's data brings better impact. So let me ask you, how does the impact of fuzzy things like pipeline and forecasting often gets a little muddy, especially with salespeople trying to game the system or create a little freedom for themselves? How have you been able to leverage data in that to build some sort of training and build some sort of insights, both for management and for the salespeople to do better at their forecasting?
So I think it's a couple of things. The first thing is that you have to pay attention to what is feeding your data and whether you've constructed it to be fed in a way that is accurate. I've seen a lot of organizations have their fields or their pipeline or whatever it is set up in a way that sort of can be gamed. Things aren't automated that maybe could be or should be. Maybe it's that we should be using a drop-down field for something and instead it's like free-for-all text. Looking at what is actually feeding that forecast and making sure that it's automated as much as possible and that what is moving things along is out of human hands as much as possible, I think is a big step in making sure that the forecast is clean. The second thing that I always look across the whole data set at the winners, right? Where we know we've been successful. These are the deals that we've won and the people who are good at selling and all that stuff. And we can look at that and say, what are the benchmarks looking back? How did those deals behave? And what are the benchmarks for success there that we should expect? For example, one of the things that I see a lot with forecasting that gets messed up is like time to close, or we'll see a lot of fake deals in the pipeline because people just aren't closing things out. If we go and we benchmark success and we say, okay, every deal that we've ever had that we've won, we are able to close it at longest 90 days. Say that's your sales cycle. Okay, so after 100 days, 120 days, you can pick whatever is appropriate, we can then use the system to close those deals out. And say, if something is stale for more than X amount of time or there's no activity after X amount of time, now we're using the system to qualify or disqualify those opportunities. And now when we look at our forecast, it's actually real. So I think that's just a very simple example that I see mucking up forecasts in almost every organization I've worked with.
Where did that happen where you were able to do that and had the most impact, especially on either forecast accuracy or just in general performance? I'd love to hear sort of a in-the-field story that you did.
There was one company that I worked with where we had, this was a very long deal cycle. It was a consultancy I was working with, and essentially they often could take anywhere from 3 to 6 months to close a large deal. As I was looking at the quote unquote pipeline, I was creating this whole system of measuring pipeline health, right? And so the first thing that I did was I went through and I said, okay, now they've got all these metrics in place. What is our average win rate, number of deals, time to close, all that? And so when I had established those revenue levers and I looked at those benchmarks, I was looking at the data of deals that had not closed yet or were perhaps forecasted. I was able to present to the team and say, hey, it looks like we have this much sitting out there. Looking at the data, it does not look like it is ever going to close. We have the win rates and we have our benchmarks of all that stuff. If we go ahead and create a protocol or rules of engagement for getting those closed out, we can use our revenue levers to understand how much we could actually expect to close in the next few months. What would you all think about having things automatically close after so long? And people were very receptive to it, right? Because when you present an idea and you have data behind it, it becomes really difficult to say no, especially if you say, hey, the potential impact is our forecast being this much more accurate. We can plan for worst case scenario versus right now we're looking at our pipeline with rose-colored glasses. So that was one instance where we were able to qualify some of those deals out and we had a much better idea and understanding of what can we actually expect to close in the next few months. Unlike previously where our CRM was pretty messy. For the first time, people felt like they could really rely on what they were seeing in the pipeline and have a very realistic understanding of what would and could close in the coming months.
That's an interesting point. The more inaccurate the forecast gets, the less likely people are to give you the kind of data you need to have a better forecast because they stop trusting the system.
Yeah.
I guess the thing that always intrigues me about you is, A, how did you get into being able to take on all these data problems and to prove the need for the changes? What was that kind of mitigating moment where it was like, okay, either someone gave you an opportunity to do it or you decided to take an opportunity to do it?
Yeah.
How did that play out?
I think I've always had this brain for continuous improvement and efficiency, and I have very little tolerance for wasted time or double work. And sometimes it is worth it to do something manually, or it is worth it to do something twice. There's definitely cases where that's applicable. There was some training that I went through very early in my career related to Lean and Six Sigma and Kanban and those sorts of concepts that once I learned about that stuff, I was like, oh, like you can use that everywhere, right? Wow. And so it was funny, my first job after college, I actually worked in a wood shop. Yeah. So I learned how to drive a forklift. Yeah. Probably one of the only sales enablement people that knows how to drive a forklift.
I loaded trucks, also I drive.
There you go. Yeah, steering's really weird. I worked in wood shop. I was doing a lot of secondary sanding, finishing, but then I was also loading and unloading, doing inventory, that sort of thing. But one of my jobs was I had to put these stickers on the boxes of our different, we turned like table legs and island legs out of wood. So I had to put a colored sticker on each box to indicate what species of wood it was. Sure. And so as I was putting these little stickers on these boxes, almost like you would use to price stuff at a yard sale, man, this is just taking forever. This is so freaking annoying. And as I'm putting these stickers on, I'm thinking to myself, there's gotta be a better way to do this. And I was sitting there and I was like, bingo markers. Bingo markers would be so much faster. I can just uncap the next one, and I don't have to spend time unpeeling every single sticker. It's just an example of how my brain is just always trying to figure out those little ways to optimize things, just make them that much easier. When I get into enablement, a lot of times people come to us with solutions, not problems, right? Stakeholders or the CEO or CRO or whoever, and they say, hey, I want you to go do a training on this thing. My continuous improvement brain says, but why? Why are we doing a training on that? My brain then starts to go in and say, where is the actual problem? What is it that we're solving? How big is that problem? What's the root cause, right? You talk about the 5 whys. That was another sort of Six Sigma thing that I learned. And that 5 whys was really, I think, key. It was just the lens that I looked at everything at from then on. And so often in enablement, the why is not because people don't know the thing. It's because they don't want to do the thing. Or maybe sometimes it's that there's some benefit to doing the thing the way that they're doing it versus how we want them to do it. So I think that that root cause analysis drove me to really be able to say, okay, when I look at data and I can use data to show the root cause, where the actual problem is, when I combine that with the context and the interviews and all that other stuff to piece together the story of what the problem is, how big it is, and why it's happening with numbers to back it up. And then I can turn it on its head and I can say, hey, actually the solution is not another training. We could make this one field required and accomplish the same thing that this training would have accomplished. Instead of telling people to do the right thing, again, we could just make it harder to do the wrong thing.
Right.
So that's, I think, continuous improvement mindset, I think, is really where I started digging in and saying data is actually a really quick way to get to that root cause.
And I also think it gives you a lot of justification for why to or not to be led by someone else's decision of what's important if it's really not what's important. Helps protect them as well as you. And the fact that, and we see this a lot in Salesforce, an open text field versus a dropdown is a gauntlet. They have to go through this path. They can no longer just hit dot space to get through that field they don't want to answer.
Yeah.
And so it requires them to give more data, and then it just solves the problem. They fix the glitch, so to speak.
Exactly.
So my second question is, I'd love to get a little bit more information from you about how you are using the data for your enablement for helping the field as far as faster sales cycles, deal velocity, things like that. Can you give us an example or two of how you were able to leverage data to help drive the training, which led to the outcome of getting salespeople closing deals faster?
Yeah. I'll give the context of the framework and then give the example that fits inside of that. So one of the way that I typically approach any organization that I'm starting to work with is I map out their revenue bow tie, right? Most people have probably seen that revenue bow tie by now. It's that customer journey, and you've got your metrics for the volume of each stage, the conversion rate between each stage, and then the time delta between each stage. And that's a pretty universally applicable way to just get your baseline for how that revenue cycle behaves within that company. So that's the first thing that I look at. And then what I actually do is I identify, if I'm looking at sales enablement as an example, what are the behaviors that contribute to either more deals being created, more deals converting, or a shorter time to sale. With sales enablement, it's all about behavior change, right? You make the wrong behaviors harder to do, you encourage the right behaviors, right. and ideally those behaviors are measurable. So when I'm sketching out this pipeline, and I can do win-loss analysis, I can do a lot of interviews, can basically come to understand what are those behaviors that are driving revenue forward. Is it that they're sending, I can look at the CMS data and say what collateral is being used the most on winning deals. Are reps who send collateral to 5 people earlier on in the process more likely to close, right? So you can compare the deal data with all of the behavior data that you have, whether it's stuff from Gong or another conversational intelligence tool, it's information from your CMS. I mean, with the litany of tools that we have these days, it's everywhere. Behavior data is everywhere. So you can figure out what are those behaviors. Again, ideally they're measurable because you're looking at data to determine what they are. And then you can place them along that bow tie and understand, okay, these are what good looks like. These are the winning behaviors. And then you can look at the data and say, well, like, where's that not happening? And so that really helps you to understand how big a problem is. But then you can also understand if this behavior is calling fall off between stage 1 and 2, based on our conversion rate and our average deal size, this is how much revenue we're potentially losing out on. Yeah. So with using this framework, one of the ones that I've run into at multiple different companies, and so I talk to people, it's a pretty common one that we see everywhere, is actually like the speed to lead issue, right? So people will go on the website, they'll talk to the chat bot or somehow submit for a demo. And then there's this handoff, right? It usually goes to either an SDR or an AE, right? Depending on your organizational structure. We all know in the marketing world that the faster you do that, the more often leads convert. The problem is that in many organizations, they haven't taken the time to instill the operational rigor or the operational, I should say, cadence that makes sure that when that lead comes in, someone gets to it right away, it gets prioritized, and it works its way through.
It just falls in a pile.
Yes, there's a lot of falling into piles, often at that initial stage. And we also know that if it does fall into some black hole somewhere, that lead is not likely to convert at all. That's a problem that I've seen over and over again. It's usually one of the first places I look. One organization I was working with, they essentially didn't have any sort of lead routing set up. They had all these leads going to no one. When you look at those leads and you have that framework and all those other metrics of here's our standard conversion rate, here's our standard time to close, blah, 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 our average deal size, you can look at it and you say, hey, based on what I see here, we've lost about X amount of revenue over the last 3 months. If our lead volume is 100 leads a month, and right now we're converting 20, I estimate that if we followed up on all of them, we would convert 40. Here's what that revenue would look like. Now I have a lot of backing and firepower to say, okay, now we're going to go understand why this is happening, and then that's going to help us fix it. And that's an interesting one because sometimes conversion is a training issue. Maybe they don't know how to talk to that customer, or they're not really talking about the value or getting to the pain very quickly, so they're not converting to the next meeting. A lot of times it's just a systems issue. We're not routing leads to the right place, or it's getting routed to somebody that's on vacation, or whatever it is. From a RevOps perspective, that's always one of the first pieces of low-hanging fruit I look for, because almost always it's something that could be improved very easily.
You just mentioned that a lot of it is often a technology problem. So as we're trying to fix a behavioral situation, but the behavioral situation is not enhanced by constantly running into the same technology problem. And I've always seen that as the lazy salesperson, if I have to do something where I'm putting a bunch of data in that gives me nothing, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I'm least inclined to give you that information. And so the technology is actually the inhibitor as opposed to the behavior. And that's a management issue because they're not managing to the actual behavior of filling out the information correctly in the CRM or whatever, versus a training issue. And often as trainers, I was a trainer, and as trainers we get thrown into, you have to fix this problem, and you're like, it's actually a RevOps problem.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to ask you is, how do you partner, or how have you partnered with, it seems like you've done a little bit of both. You're doing a lot of what is traditionally RevOps in order to give you the advantage in revenue enablement. So how do you partner with RevOps? Who actually owns this? It seems like in a lot of ways you take a lot of ownership of this data gathering of the sales process and what's working and what's not working. But what does the partnership look like for you? And ideally, when it comes to figuring out how to own the lane that you're in, but also help the others in those lanes to drive the sales success.
I think that it's like any sale you're trying to make, right? You have to figure out, you have this problem or this pain that you need to solve, and you need the help of another internal stakeholder to solve it. So in that, I tried to figure out what about this behavior is making it a pain in the butt for this RevOps team. Is it that they have to go in and like manually clean up a bunch of stuff because salespeople are not filling things in correctly? Or is it, what is it that I can do to help make their life easier? And I can try to serve them in that way, but then at the same time, I can have whatever problem it is I'm trying to get at over here. When I can put things into their terms is usually much more effective in getting help from them. Being able to speak the data language, I think, goes a long way in working with our RevOps partners, because they know that when I give them the exact, like, what I'm trying to get at is XYZ. This is the purpose of me asking you for this thing. I think that the best way to do that would be to look at this field, that field, and the other field and calculate XYZ over time. Do you agree? And that puts it into terms that they really understand. And because they also know what my goal is for that data, they're like, oh, actually, we're already measuring that over here. Or that's a great way to get that. I actually didn't think of that before. But they also have much clearer picture of what to actually go build you, right? Or what they're going to actually go try to put into a report or into a dashboard or whatever it is. So I think that just really understanding like within what it is that I'm trying to accomplish, how is it going to benefit them, communicating that, but then also very clearly communicating as much as I can in their data language, what I need and what I'm trying to get at. Usually stakeholders are pretty appreciative of that and willing to help.
Have you always worked with a RevOps team, or have you just taken on some of those roles if it wasn't there?
I would say it's been
50-50-ish. Most of the tech companies that I've worked in have had a RevOps team. Some of the companies that have been more like legacy / real world products haven't necessarily had a focused RevOps team, but maybe they've had an IT team that has like a data person that knows all the SQL databases and stuff like that. And so they know how all that stuff works. Or it might even be just the admin of the system that all your stuff is living in, right? Maybe you don't have a whole RevOps team, but you have a Salesforce admin that knows it inside and out and knows how to build the reports and knows how to get you the data that you need. The data has to live somewhere and it has to be owned by someone. So if there's no RevOps team, or if someone doesn't own that backend data, like I've had some cases where we have data going into a tool or into a thing and nobody seems to really be the owner of it. So I'm like, I need this data, so can I have access so I can just go get what I need myself? Yeah. So I think that's being willing to jump in and sift through to get to what you need is also really helpful.
I think one of the biggest hurdles when you're translating like executive need, I need X, I need Y, into requirements from data. I think it sounds like this is one of the areas you excel in, is being able to, I need these requirements to get this output for these reasons. And that allows anybody, an admin, a RevOps team, or anyone, have a clearer picture for, oh, okay, I know where to find this data for you, or build this report, or whatever. Yeah. So that's a really critical skill. It doesn't always come out of some other departments, because usually they end up in sales ops or RevOps or something like that, because they're good at those sorts of things. So that's one of the reasons I was excited to have you come talk. I do want to pivot into technology. When it comes down to it, not every sales tech stack is effective. And you mentioned Salesforce, but I know you've built sales systems and other data systems from scratch. So can you give us an experience of when you had to put this all together? And most of the time, you don't have the kind of budgets that most companies say they want to give you, but they don't. And so on a razor-thin budget, how did you build a good visibility from your data?
I was working with a software consultancy, and my title was Sales Enablement and Marketing Manager. So I was doing everything from doing all this sort of RevOps type stuff to sending emails to our clients every quarter, and like across that full, I was like go-to-market team in one. And so where I started there in terms of identifying where we needed to work on things and advocating for that was, again, I start with that framework, right? The revenue bow tie. And you figure out, do we have the data to measure these very basic things? How many people are in each stage? What is the time that it takes? What is the conversion? What is our average order value or average contract value, however you want to quantify it? And so we had a homegrown CRM, and I had to look at that bow tie and figure out, okay, from this data that we have, what can I pull? What is accessible? What are we measuring? And one of the things that I ran into there that is, I think, most common I've seen in other organizations, or even when I've helped organizations set up a CRM, is they don't necessarily capture stage change dates. So when the period of time that it took for someone to go from stage 1 to stage 2.
Demo to opportunity to quote to...
So a lot of times, like HubSpot, for example, by default will capture the average age of something in a stage, but it won't on the individual record capture an S1 to S2 date or an S2 to S3 date. So that's actually something that usually has to be set up when you build the system. Many companies, especially startups that are maybe like just throwing HubSpot in and like building things as they go, they may not necessarily even know to do that. So when I was building picture of our pipeline health, right, I had to look at each one of those data points and say, okay, where am I getting this one? Okay, it's coming from this table. Okay, where am I getting from this one? Okay, it's coming from over here. And where I was missing things, I had to then go to our team and say, hey, we don't have this data now, but the second best time to plant a data seed is today. And so I was like, so let's start capturing those dates. Let's start capturing these things.
Did that did it run across, so I would like to push towards the tech stack building. What does it take for you to start to visualize, okay, we don't have this data, but then is it just, I just need it in HubSpot? Or is it, okay, now we're starting to think, because as we start to move towards everybody wants to implement AI in some manner, and that's going to put a lot of impact on revenue enablement, what you're able to do. You may become more prompt engineer than you are trainer over time if a system's built. So how are you thinking through the tech stack, both at SaveATree or just in general, as you're seeing this onslaught of opportunity through AI?
Yeah, I think that the best way to make sure that we're not getting down the shiny spiral is to start with, and again, we do this in enablement, start with the problem, right? Start with the thing that you're trying to solve. And so if I'm trying to solve for, say, reps are doing proposals and they look terrible or something, right? We don't necessarily know exactly why they look terrible, but maybe our knee-jerk reaction is to go look at a proposal tool like PandaDoc or Quilla or something like that. We think, oh, if we buy this tool and it's AI powered, so it's going to make all of our presentations beautiful. Maybe the presentations were not great because the reps didn't know how to use Google Slides, or because there wasn't a nice pre-built gallery of stuff, or because we didn't have a system in place that put guardrails around design or content or things like that. And so once you figure out what those particular problems are, then you can go see, oh, is it because they don't know how to do something? Is it because they don't have the tools to do something? Or is a tool just going to make it more efficient? So I think that no matter if it's AI or the next CRM or whatever it is, when you start with the problem in the use case, that's when you can really distill down to what the solution should be, could be. And a lot of times it's not what other people ask you to do initially.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question. What is your favorite success story when it comes to something that you generated, both from data-driven insights to enablement? Where do you feel you did your favorite success?
I think probably one of my favorites is one of the companies that I was working for. I went through the whole framework that I'd outlined earlier of figuring out our whole revenue pipeline, where the data was going to come from. I did this very comprehensive analysis, essentially, of what winning deals looked like and what were those attributes, what kinds of industries were we winning in, what were the channels that those deals were coming in from. I'd aggregated a project score that took a lot of the things that we cared about in terms of, was it a profitable deal? Did it close quickly? Was our team happy with them as a customer? That sort of thing. So I aggregated that score and then used that to say, okay, where is it that we're finding success and how do we get more of that? But then also what it did was it helped me understand what kinds of marketing channels are, or sales tactics or whatever it is, what's not working. And so when I went and did that analysis, I was basically able to present to the team, say, hey, it looks like over here, we have the highest project scores on things that come in from organic demand generation. Let's go focus on that. And once I figured that out, then I could use my marketing skill, everything that I've learned over the years about SEO and all that stuff, to say, here's some tactical things that we can go do. We can go improve site performance. We can go implement a content strategy to write more articles about this industry we want to target, or for this target audience that we have now figured out is our best customer. And so I'd made a set of recommendations around that. But then also we looked at Outbound. So what we traditionally think of as calling up a random list and seeing who we can get a meeting with. Those deals had the lowest project scores, the least success rate, and were, quite frankly, like, some of those customers were just people that we would rather not deal with anyway. And so when we had other leaders in the business maybe advocating for, if we just do more outbound, we'll get more volume and we'll win the math game, I could look at the data and say, actually, this is going to hurt us in the long run if we dump a bunch of time and effort. Let's take that same time and effort and dump it into this organic demand generation initiative. The other thing that we looked at was partnerships, and that was also really effective. So there was a series of tactical things that we did to improve our SEO, to make it easier for our business development team to talk to partners and have great collateral and reach out to past ones, initiatives around that. And after implementing all that, we were able to produce, just from those particular efforts, over $1 million in pipeline, in qualified pipeline that next quarter. So it was really cool to be able to see, okay, these are things that are broken. Here's how we know from the data. And then we were able to then go execute, and then on a regular cadence come back to those metrics and say, did we move the needle? Is this working? Are we having an impact? And that just, it was so great from a team perspective too, that like everybody understood very thoroughly the problem, what we were doing as a team to solve it, and then everybody could, as we go, because we were saying this is the measurable goal, right? We could say, wow, like we got more organic leads this month than last month or whatever. Because we were very specific and defined about that, the progress was clear to see. And it also makes it easy to pivot away if you're not seeing progress. Yeah, that was probably one of my favorite.
Hey, $1 million in pipeline in 3 months. It's a great success. Any other thoughts about how data and revenue enablement can get together and lead the way? It sounds like in that particular instance, you led the process of changing some initiatives. Don't go there, don't do this. Outbound is not the way to do it. It's this. Here's the direction. How do you feel today? What sort of advice would you give to other revenue enablement folks that are trying to figure out, hey, am I training for the right reasons? Am I doing these kind of things? How do you do that and build a data-driven system?
Yeah, I think that the first thing that you have to do is to take ownership of the data side, right? If these are the metrics that you are expected to move, you need to know and understand how those metrics come to be, what feeds them, how the different objects within your CRM are associated, and what those stages look like. You have to get that data understanding and take ownership of that so that you can go proactively find what the actual cause, where the actual problems are, quantify them, and then use that to go from, you told me to do this training, and I don't really have a good way to say no, so I guess I'm gonna go do that, to being that strategic advisor to the business that is saying, you want to make more money. I have followed the breadcrumbs of data and behavior back to this root cause. Here's my solution for that root cause. And if we do this, we could expect potentially revenue upside of X amount of dollars. Would you like me to go work on this thing?
You want $1 million in pipeline?
Yeah, you want $1 million? Let's go do this. So I think really we have a lot of enablers who feel like they don't have a seat at the table or whatever. I can tell you that every executive team, every board, they are looking at the numbers. And they are looking at the business. And if you are not also looking through that lens, you won't have a seat at the table. You will continue to be a teacher or a content creator or an internal communications person. And none of those things are bad, absolutely not. But if you are someone who wants to move into that role of truly enabling revenue, right? Not just enabling a new hire or enabling particular communication, right? You have to own and upskill on data so that you can then be that bridge between the numbers that the executive team and the board over here are trying to move in the right direction and what's actually happening on the ground.
So data equals impact and gives you the authority to take charge.
Absolutely.
To make sure that impact is felt.
Yeah.
Sally, I thank you so much for your time and your wisdom, and it has been a real joy to sit with you. That concludes our episode, and really appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe. If you would like to reach out to Sally, you can find her on LinkedIn. She's got some great content when it comes to how to build actual data systems and walks you through that. So reach out to her on LinkedIn. Feel free to like and share, and we appreciate it, and we'll see you in the next episode.